Each month, I get the opportunity to spend a few minutes with Dr. Chuck Misja of North Coast Family Foundation. Today, we're going to deal with a topic that I think is really important, especially in today's culture, and that is the issue of anger. And Chuck, we do see it all around us, and if we look at the news headlines, we see the fact that people seem to have issues with anger. It's prevalent in our culture.
Yes, and there's much behind that. Sometimes it's a feeling of victimization, a sense of entitlement, but sometimes it goes much deeper than that, Len. And anger gets a bad rap almost all the time, but sometimes anger can be a good thing.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. First of all, just what's the underlying thing going on here? I mean, we hear about triggers, but in some ways, probably triggers are more of a symptom than the root cause. So what's the underlying thing? Why do people get angry?
Because we want something and we don't get it. That's
okay. True.
And there's a family of feelings with anger. So we talk about anger, but really there's a lot of associated feelings. So we can be irritated, have maybe a mild annoyance, like I might get upset with you because you tell that tired joke over and over again, and I think, Len, why do you have to tell that joke? Yeah. Okay. Or at the other extreme is rage, way beyond anger. And rage is when people get violent and really bad things happen.
Yeah, I just saw recently there was another incident, tragic incident of road rage, and the person who was the victim wasn't even aware that they did anything wrong or they were the offending party, but it just expresses itself like that. So that's obviously the darker, bad side of anger that we're seeing in our culture today. Is there anything good about anger?
Yes, anger has connotations of a thirst for righteousness, a thirst for justice. So, for example, let's suppose that I meet a parent and I know that his kid is bullying my child. And I approach them and I say, could you get your kid to back off a little? And he says, well, my kid's not doing anything wrong. So there's kind of a double whammy there. I feel like that's really unfair, and I want justice. And so I'm going to be angry that it's happening at all, and angry that the other parent is not taking responsibility.
Yeah, and maybe that's even a little what we see in society from time to time. People see an issue and it makes them angry because they think that there's an injustice that's taking place.
Yes, and many times that's accurate. There is an injustice taking place. Now, how they deal with it, of course, is not always adaptive.
Right.
But the underlying idea, is there justice? That's a question for all of us Christians. We wonder, how do we make sense of this?
That's what I'm thankful when I talk about North Coast Family Foundation, is I know you approach things from a biblical perspective. So this might be the time just to jump in there and say, what does the Bible actually say about anger?
Well, it says a lot about anger because anger is not a new phenomenon. And in a very practical sense, I guess there's two broad categories. One is, in general, to make a decision about how a person is going to understand anger. And the idea is to deal with anger on a timely basis, and the idea is to be slow to anger. The old adage about counting to 10 before you say or do anything is really good advice. Really good advice.
Okay, fair enough. How do we know that we're angry? I mean, sometimes, we're sometimes the least likely people to understand what other people see as obvious. So how do we know that we're angry or having an anger issue?
Yes. Well, probably the best way is just to pay attention to what we're doing physically. We've all been in social contexts where someone says, Chuck, you seem a little annoyed. And I say, I'm not angry. Why are you bringing that up?
Yeah.
And everybody knows that I'm angry except me. So if I'm clenching my teeth, if I'm pounding my fist on the table, if my face is flushed, if I'm perspiring, those are all physiological indicators of anger. And if I'm aware of those, it helps me cope.
Touchy subject, difficult subject, someone's living with someone that has an anger issue. Any advice on how to broach that subject with that person who gets angry?
The Bible talks a lot about being cunning and about being shrewd and about using discernment. Nathan the prophet had some bad news for the king.
Yeah. And
he was very clever how he brought that about. And so coming at it full front sometimes is not the thing to do. You have to be shrewd. You have to really think things through. You have to use wisdom and discernment. And getting counsel can be a good way of preparing for something like that.
Yeah, that leads me to just what I'd like to spend a couple of seconds talking about, and that is for the person, for the family that knows this is an issue with themselves, it's affecting work or relationships, and they don't know how to get a grip on it. Or maybe you know that this is something a family member is dealing with. Have you had some success in working with this issue, and how do people connect with you?
Well, yes, because we can help people walk through this. This is, as you pointed out at the beginning, this is a very common problem. And so we have lots of experience in how do you approach your husband who's angry, or your child who's got all kinds of temper problems. So we can help people think that through.
All right, people answer the phone at North Coast Family, so how do they get a hold of you?
Well, our phone number is 440-842-6867, or you can go to our website, northcoastfamily.com.
I have a feeling this was a super timely and helpful conversation, Chuck. Thank you.
I hope so. Always a pleasure to be here, Len.